Hello and welcome to the Cardiac Cats YouTube channel. I'm your host, Jacob Shorba, and today we're going to be jumping into yet another position group for the 2025 NFL Draft in our summer scouting series. Today it's a big one, and this will be the last really big video I'll probably do for summer scouting, but we're going to be talking about all the defensive backs. This includes cornerbacks, this is including slot cornerbacks, so nickelbacks, whatever you want to call them. You've also got safeties. So there's a lot of prospects we're going to talk through. I've scouted, I believe, 16 of them, 5 safeties, 11 cornerbacks. We're going to go through all these guys. We're going to talk about them, what they bring, and where they really stand heading into their final season. There's a lot that can happen, but it should give you guys a good idea of where things stand early. And I'll tell you right now, before we jump into this class completely, I would say that each of these positions, talking about cornerback and safety, right now have 2 top-tier prospects, with cornerback being considerably stronger. We'll get into the players, but these are some really great classes at the top of them. I think you could see some very early picks, especially from the cornerback group. So we're going to talk about some of those guys today, but they'll come at the end of this video. So with that all said, we're going to go ahead and we're going to jump right into this. So we'll go from my lowest ranked guys of who I scouted up to the highest ranked, and we're going to start with safety. We're going to go through our 5 guys here, then we'll move on to cornerback. So first prospect that we're going to talk about, Xavier out of Notre Dame. So he's a free safety. He's an older one. He's going to be 23, I believe, during the college football season. He's also maybe a little bit shorter of a safety, although we do see some guys come in around 6 foot. But compared to some of these other guys, not the same size advantages as the rest. I ended up having him as my lowest grade there. But Xavier, he does have an adequate frame, and he's a player that I think is a very hard worker. I think that's one of the first things that stands out about him. He's going to be someone you're not going to have to worry about the urgency from. So if you're looking for a player that's going to earn his time on the field, Xavier is going to do that. What is really enticing about him when you look on the surface is the statistics from 2023, where he ended up having a ridiculous 7 interceptions, which I believe was tied for the most in all of college football. So really impressive stuff there, because no matter how you walk into it, some of that has to be talent, right? You got to be in the right place at the right time. You can get lucky a few times, and I felt like that was the case for Xavier. We'll talk about that a little bit. But still, very impressive stuff from him to have 7 interceptions in a college football season. You know, we aren't talking about playing 17 games like you do in the NFL. He's also a guy that consistently finds himself around the ball. He's putting himself into plays. And so I think he'll be someone that will probably end up having a lot of tackles in the NFL, or at least attempts at them. He's also someone who didn't really allow big passes. His longest pass of the 2023 college football season ended up being for 21 yards. So some really nice stuff there. But to me, Xavier is kind of a player with a seemingly limited ceiling. And it doesn't seem to be something that's obvious when you first hear about him. But that's just the outcome that I ended up coming up with here after scouting him out. There's some major concerns with this game. He's a player who missed a lot of tackles, not just this year, but in previous years as well. He's also, as an athlete, not much more than average. I ended up getting actually slightly below average from me as far as what he can do there. In run defense, which is going to be something important for your safeties, although given free safeties aren't going to be necessarily as involved, I think he's really just average there at the end of the day. I also don't think he has ideal range for a free safety, given that he's not an incredible athlete. And going back to the interception talk, well, it's really impressive to have 7 interceptions in a season. I had some questions about how much they really prove. Because, for example, like one of the games I watched was against USC. It was against Caleb Williams. And I thought going in, this is going to be really impressive, right? Like, this guy is picking off the best prospect from the 2024 NFL draft class. Every throw that he picked off was just terrible. Like, Williams was literally just throwing directly to him. So I haven't seen all the other interceptions necessarily, but I know that a chunk of them really weren't that impressive. They didn't really say a whole ton about Xavier Watts, and I kind of wonder if this is a statistic that he's not able to back up again in the 2024 college football season. Now, getting into my summary on him, I said he's a high-energy player who consistently finds himself around the football. In 2023, called in an astonishing 7 interceptions, leading all college football in that statistic. And he's never really been a major liability for his team because, like I said, he hasn't allowed a pass over 21 yards. But at the same time, Watts appears to be a player with a potentially limited ceiling. He's a poor tackler. He struggles to bring down the ball carrier. He lacks the athleticism to stick with receivers downfield, did not look good in that regard. And his interceptions were not really as impressive as you would have expected. He wasn't as much of a ball hawk as I would think he would be for a 7 interception guy. But nevertheless, how I see him is that he's a player that should have a long career in the NFL and be able to carve out a role. And so I think that's worth, right now, going into the season, a late 3rd round pick. And I look at him very similarly to Cam Kitchens, who was a draft prospect from this last year, started out really high in the rankings, ended up falling down the board because there just weren't that many impressive things that final year, and then especially in his testing. And I kind of think it's going to end up being the same way for Xavier Watts. Comparing both those players, though, outside of the cycle, things that also stood out as far as a comparison, both were highly productive undersized safeties. I think that at the end of the day, Kitchens probably comes in smaller than what Watts does. I think he was like 5'11", 5'10". And then both players, they have those athletic limitations that really brought up questions late in their career. And that's something I kind of expect to happen with Xavier Watts. So that's where I get that from. I think that's a pretty good comp here, one I feel pretty good about. But we'll see. If he backs it up this year, probably a player that ends up going a little bit higher in the late 3rd round. Now, getting to our next guy, we've got a lot of Xaviers to kick off this list. And we're going to talk about a few Iowa players as well. But our first Iowa player here is Xavier Nwankpa. I probably said that wrong. But hey, that's just part of scouting, because we get a lot of names we can't pronounce. But we'll get it probably at the combine or before then. But Xavier, we'll call him that. He is a really good player when talking about size, talking about run defense, and talking about his physicality. I think he's going to do very well in those specific roles as a strong safety, which is the main position he's played for Iowa. He's also a young player still. I believe he was a 5-star recruit, one of the best recruits in Iowa history. Whether or not he ends up being one of the best players, that's what he was coming into college. He's a big guy, though. 6'2", 210. He's definitely got that strong safety size. Big, stocky build. He's a sound run defender as well. Someone that I think immediately can come in the NFL and be reliable in that regard, as long as the lights aren't too bright. And you never know with that, honestly, with prospects. But those are some things I like about him. He brings good physicality as a big safety. Not necessarily elite, I would say, but good, right? And at the end of the day, like, when I'm looking at him, he's just someone who did his job consistently on the field. And when you get that kind of player, with how many teams there are, with 2 safeties on a team, with some of them even playing in the nickel, he's probably going to have a role in the NFL as a starter, and I think keep that for a while, whether it's in one place or moving around the league. But I think he's someone who can start in the NFL. And then final positive here, kind of going back to the run defense, there is immense upside as a run defender, and I think he can get even better. But right now, he is a very good player in that regard. But of course, being a 3rd round prospect for me, there are concerns here. When I was trying to figure out length for these guys, looking through photos, trying to gauge it the best I can, and we'll see how that ends, right? We'll get combine measurements, and I'm sure some of these will be a little off. But Xavier appeared to only have average arm length, so that is a minor concern. He's also a player that's had a very high percentage of missed tackles throughout his career. That's something that really needs to take a step forward, because at the end of the day, that's really why this run defense grade isn't up at like maybe an A+, because you can know where the ball is going and not be able to do anything about it if you can't tackle. You know, like talking about a prospect who's like that was drafted recently for Jacksonville would be Jarion Jones, who I think is a very instinctual player, a very smart player, but he was a liability as a tackler. And if he can improve that, well, he's going to take a massive step forward and might be a hell of a nickel defender because he's able to do something about it. But it doesn't matter if you can't tackle, and it's kind of the same thing here in that regard for Xavier. He's a guy as well, given, you know, his big size, he does lack ideal overall speed. It's not necessarily terrible, but to stay with receivers, it was pretty clear he had to stay physical with them. He's also a guy that really doesn't have a wow factor. You could see that by the highest grade being an A-. You know, good areas, but not stuff that really blows you away. He's not a fluid athlete. He struggles to react quick enough to receivers. That's not a good combination with being a subpar athlete, you know, for what you're hoping to get. And the final concern I have with him is that he's just not really a great asset in coverage. And it feels like right now he's just kind of a good guy against the run. You know, maybe you go to a division that has a lot of rushing, has their offenses built around the run, and you're going to play against those teams more often and be more successful. Or maybe you are just rotational, but I think that's kind of his best role coming in until he can prove that he's good in coverage, which I just wonder if he has the ideal skill set for that. Now, for my summary, I ended up saying that he's a big, stocky safety that should get playing time in the box. He brings a good dose of physicality to the run game and delivers some big hits that could help set the tone of a game. He does a good job of being patient as a run defender, maintains integrity, and gets involved when needed. He doesn't have major limitations to his game outside of maybe coverage, but I find he's average in a few areas. He's not a great athlete. He struggles to change direction, to get to speed, or get up to speed quickly, and this has made him a liability in coverage at times, especially when he wasn't physical receivers, when he allowed them to separate and make the open play. He's also an inconsistent tackler, an attribute that limits him in what would otherwise be considered great run play. And finally, you know, I felt like he was a guy who's clearly built to play strong safety out of the two options here, but he's going to have to take a step forward in coverage to be a complete prospect. Now, this was a weaker comp for me, not one I'm super confident in, but just trying to find a player who's kind of similar. I felt like Brian Cook was the best one I could find. Both these players were big, stocky safety prospects. They showed flashes of physicality, good run defense, but both of them ultimately struggled with athleticism and ended up losing a lot of receivers in phase, not really being guys who are going to have big plays as well and create turnovers consistently. Now, as far as film I watched, I didn't mention this for Xavier Watts, so I'm going to mention that now. I ended up watching Ohio State, USC, and Oregon State for Xavier Watts, all 2023 film. For Xavier from Iowa, we'll say I watched Penn State, Wisconsin, and Michigan, all from 2023. Now, we're going to go ahead, we're going to get into some of these top guys. We're going to take a bit of a jump here as far as projections in the draft, and someone I think could be a very good starter. I don't necessarily think I'd call him elite, but I think he's going to be a good player in the NFL. And that's none other than Hunter Wohler, who's a strong safety out of Wisconsin. He's still a younger player. I believe this is his fourth year of college. He's going to be 22 just before the draft. He has got similar size to what Xavier from Iowa does, but he is a better athlete at the end of the day, and that's what really kind of saves him in comparison, helps him be good in a lot of different aspects. You see a lot of great grades for Hunter here. But getting into my positives, you know, it's great size, really good length too. I felt like he was definitely lengthy as far as his arms and what he can do, and you could even see that show up on film at times because he'd be out of position on a tackle and still be able to bring the guy down because he's got the long arms to get a grip. He is just a very, very strong player. something that's going to stand out about him. Very strong tackler. He's constantly involved in plays. He is always involved as a tackler. I think out of all these guys, it might be wrong because our top two guys, maybe they compare well here, but I believe that Hunter ended up having the most tackles out of this group. So very reliable in what his job's going to be. He's a good athlete for his size. Very impressive for his size, I'd say. And in coverage, he's sound. He's not someone I'm really super concerned about. And he has a good awareness of how the play is developing. He's usually putting himself in the right position. And then the final positive I wrote down for him was that he does well picking up receivers and then getting enough contact early on in the play, maybe in those first 5 yards where you can get physical with someone. He can get in phase doing that, and it helps him stay in the play. He kind of knows where to toe the line, right? He's not getting penalized a ton for it, but he's able to use his physicality to his advantage and make up for, the lack of elite athleticism. Still good athleticism, just not elite athleticism, for being 6'2", 211. That's probably not going to happen that often. But as far as concerns here, change of direction was something that I wasn't a huge fan of on film. Was not great in that regard. He's also not much of a big play guy. Didn't see a ton of that. It's kind of limited to run stops, where he will make some plays in the backfield, and perhaps that can count, but I'm not seeing him as someone who's going to have a ton of interceptions. I believe, in fact, there was only one game where he had a pick, and to be fair, it was 2 picks, but it wasn't something that he was doing consistently on the field. He's also a player that lacks explosion as an athlete, which is why he's got to be physical with receivers to stay in plays, which he does well. And then occasionally you'll see in run defense that he'll bite on something. And I think that's probably the main reason why you go from maybe being at like an A+ for run defense to getting down to an A- on these rankings. But at the same time, man, like there's a lot of impressive things with Hunter. I ended up saying for my summary that he's a menace for Wisconsin's back end of the defense. He's got great size, impressive strength, and a sound brand of football. He's a great asset in run defense, often having the anticipation to reach the ball carrier and finish the tackle. While he struggles to change directions, he has good speed and barrels downhill when necessary. Hunter is sound in coverage, watching the play develop, and often putting himself in the right positions. However, he's not much of a big play safety, having one big outing against Georgia Southern and going dark for the rest of the season. Even if Wohler isn't going to make consistent highlight plays, he has the makeup of a good starting safety who can do anything a coach asks of him. Now, my comp for him, I ended up going with Marcus May. The reason for this was because both prospects very similar in terms of length, dense players, bigger guys, and their games really thrived around physicality and consistently great tackling. But both prospects also had some athletic limitations, specifically around change of direction, and that kind of limited their coverage upside. And both of them were not guys who really had a ton of interception production in college football. Now, for my grade, I have him as a second-round pick, somewhere in the middle of the second round. I think a team would be pretty happy with that selection and be getting a good starter long-term. Someone I would say will be a very safe prospect in this class. And then as far as the film I reviewed for Hunter Wohler, ended up being Purdue, Iowa, and LSU in the 2023 football season. Now, getting to our top 2 guys. 2 phenomenal players here. And I'm going to precurse this by saying that it's going to be common in summer scouting to be wrong on a few guys, right? And there's a few of them when I've scouted them, I realized I'm probably going to end up moving the needle quite a bit once the season starts, once we start to see more. Maybe there's things I miss. Sometimes you just watch film that really does not properly represent a player, even watching 3 games apiece. And one of the guys that might apply to, who a lot of people have as a definitive blue chip prospect in this class, it's Malaki Starks. I ended up having him as an early second round pick. And I just want to precurse that by saying that there's a good chance that he ends up being in my first round. at the end of the day. But it was really a question of instincts. That's where I couldn't really do it, because if you're going to pick someone in the first round, I want to get someone who is an elite prospect. Talking about the safety position, right? Brian Branch is an example where, yeah, he's not like an incredible athlete, but he's just so good at everything else. And you saw him go into Detroit and immediately have an impact. First game of the year, he's picking off Patrick Mahomes. Now, given Kadarius Toney is the blame, but he's a good player, and it was an easy projection. And if you're going to use a pick on a position like that in the first round, you want to get it right. And I think Malaki Starks can reach that level, but I think there's a little bit missing for what I saw as far as instincts, and that's something that it's very easy, very possible that maybe I just didn't watch the right games. Maybe I watched 3 games where he just wasn't playing normal. It's very possible, and that's maybe why we get to this grade. But still, lowest grade I've got here on anything is a B. He's a good player. And that comp to Lewis Cine is not an insult. Lewis coming out, I think, was someone who had a wide variety of outcomes, and it's kind of the same for how I see Starks right now, although I'd be a lot more confident. But getting into the actual notes, now that I've talked about this for a moment, things I said about him as positives: he is a lengthy guy, like about as lengthy as it's going to get. He's got a well-filled frame. He's a great mover, has plus athleticism, very good tackler. Something you want to see from your safeties. And the second guy on this list now, that's a good tackler. That's a very common trend in these rankings, is that a lot of the poor tacklers are at the bottom. Guys you can trust are at the top, because it's a big part of this job, especially as the last line of defense. He's someone who's super reliable, consistently does his job, sticks well in coverage, and he is dominant at the catch point. Right now, I see him as very good at everything, but maybe just a tick below getting to be a great prospect, and then reaching maybe that elite level. But he is a jack of all trades. Now, concerns, once again, isn't really elite in any facet of the game. That's something I could be wrong about, but that's just what I got from my film evaluation. And I felt like his processing skills could improve at times. They're good, but there's another step he can take there. And then as far as his instincts, you saw flashes on film very clearly. But when I watched him, there were also some plays that really just raised questions for me, where I wondered why he came to the decision that he made. And so when I watch him this year, it's something I'm going to be checking out very close. And, if you see sound play from him and he's making the right decisions on the field, he's going to be one of these guys who could be close to perfect, because everything's there to work with for Malaki Starks. We got a whole year. I think he's going to be a better player this year. I think realistically he makes it into the first round and ends up maybe even getting to the middle of the first round, which is really impressive for a safety. But my summary on him: he's a high upside prospect. He's someone who's going to do everything you're going to ask of him. He's got great size, great athleticism. He can move around the field well. He's a reliable run defender. In a class of defensive backs, he's probably the most reliable in that regard. He consistently makes tackles. He puts himself in the right place. He's proficient at everything, but I just have concerns about his overall instincts. Sometimes he doesn't process the play fast enough. He's a tick late when reacting. Sometimes he's just a little out of position or misses an assignment, and you wonder what happened. There are flashes of good instinct on film, but there's also plays that raise questions. And so he's going to have to prove this year that he can consistently make the right decisions to be that game changer and to warrant what should be a first round status. Now, the Lewis Cine comp, to go back to that, and we're not comping based on NFL careers. I want to make that clear. We're comping based on the college careers for these players. And Cine was a first round pick, and there was reason why he was that. Both these prospects were strong, lengthy safeties. They came out of Georgia, guys that had borderline elite athleticism. They both excelled in run defense and tackling. They were consistently making plays, but both prospects also had some lapses in decision making. But the difference is that Starks has another year, right? Starks has a season where I think he's already a little bit ahead of where Scene was when he declared. I think he's going to take another step, and I think he's going to be a much safer prospect and probably end up working out in the NFL. But we're at a point where we just got to see it, right? He's got that opportunity in front of him, and I have faith that he's going to prove everyone right who has him as a first-round pick. But for now, he's an early second. I ended up giving him that early second grade and film reviewed for him. I ended up watching Florida, Missouri, and Alabama. So a lot of SEC teams there, and all from 2023. Now, getting into our top guy here, and someone I was really surprised with and really impressed by, is Kevin Winston Jr. He is my number one safety in this class, and I think he warrants a late first-round selection. He has incredible size, phenomenal size. I think that he's got everything you're going to ask for in that regard, and he could play any role at safety. I think he could be a strong safety if he had to. Nevertheless, he's played more as a free safety. He is the best tackler that I've probably watched in this entire class, and I mean every position. And it's kind of hard not to say that when you haven't missed a tackle in your career. Like, he has not done that yet. It's impressive. He's played 2 years of football. I don't know if he started necessarily the whole first year, but he does have quite a few snaps under him. He has yet to miss a tackle. So, fantastic stuff there. I feel like he had a great understanding of where to be in coverage. He was consistently in the right place. He breaks downfield at the right time. He is an explosive mover as well. He has very good speed. He closes ground quick, and he is a physical football player. Although given, he's not necessarily great in that regard, but he is physical. He's good. So a lot of really nice things from him. Now, as far as concerns, as a blitzer, I think he's kind of average. Maybe he becomes more than that this year, but I wasn't super impressed there. A lot of his lower graded games came against good opponents, so he did struggle a bit when he played against better teams. And while he has good instincts similar to Starks, he can take another step forward this year. There's times for Winston where he'll bite too early on run plays. If you want to see that on film, watch Michigan from 2023. Did that a few times, and it really cost them on some plays. But that's something you can clean up, and something he could definitely improve with another year, and as a young player, very similar to Starks. The final concern I had with him, just the physicality. It's not always there, but it still is a positive, but it's not as much of a strength as you want to see. So I think he can take another step forward. I would like to see that from him this year. Now, for my summary, I said he's an uber talented prospect who really is just a few steps away from being an elite prospect at the position. He has near perfect size. He has plus athleticism. He is going to play in a variety of roles in the secondary and be successful doing that. He is the most reliable tackler I've ever scouted. He's a smart player. He often reads the play very early, and he's involved. And occasionally, though, the only issue is really that he can lose run integrity, going back to Michigan in 2023. While he plays with good physicality, it's not something that always shows up, especially when he's engaged with blockers on run plays. He struggles to get off blocks. With little left to prove this season, though, I think that he's going to establish himself as a likely first-round pick if he takes another step forward, given that the NFL considers the position worth taking that early. We'll have to see, of course, but it's hard at safety. Brian Branch, to me, was a guy that you could have taken him in the middle of the first round, and it would have been a good pick. He went in the middle of the second. So with both these guys, as good as they are, I think there's definitely going to be those questions about whether they're first-round prospects, but maybe they're helped out by, for example, like a recent extension in Tampa Bay with Antoine Winfield Jr. With him getting more money and resetting the market, I think there, although safety was devalued otherwise, maybe that kind of sets things back. We'll have to see. But I hope for their sake, they're first-round picks. I think they're players that are very good at their position, and if we're just going off how good you are at your job, they're a lot higher than a late first or an early second round pick. Now, those are our safeties. So I've got 11 cornerbacks we're going to go through. We're going to start with a couple guys that are more of slot guys, and then we'll kind of mix it up from there. But the first guy, and the one I ended up having graded the lowest, and this is the second year in a row I've had him graded pretty low, that was Andrew Mukuba. I have him as nickel back. He's 22 years old, transferred to Texas. He's 6 foot 186. So size-wise, I think it's solid. Like, he's got good length overall, and so I gave him a positive grade there. He is a very good athlete. Very impressive. I actually gave him a blue chip score in that regard. He's got a lot of experience playing as a nickelback and a safety. He's someone who's got a lot of quickness. He's got a lot of reps in man coverage. You're going to see this list is a little short for positives, but other things I noticed, he flashes good upside. As a run defender, still has steps to take given he graded out as a D, and he's got range. So this is a toolsy prospect. That's really what there is there. But there are some major concerns with Andrew Mukuba, and where I just don't see him as a starter or someone right now. I would take the bet that he ends up figuring it out in the NFL. My concerns for him were that while he appears to have a lot of muscle mass, he looks like a strong guy. His play would indicate that he's very undersized. He is someone who can get bulldozed. He needs to work on missed tackles. He's someone who does not have a great understanding of what's coming next. The play processing can take an air step, and it could do a lot more than that too. He often gets caught out of the play. He's not a consistent guy that's going to be making tackles. He doesn't have the ideal strength to bring down runners on his own. He gets over aggressive quite often. He could take poor angles and miss some big hits. I also found that his route recognition isn't great. He can be deceived very easily, and he's consistently giving up a lot of separation on routes. So this is very much a developmental prospect that it gets to the point, when you scout him for so many years, you wonder if he's going to take that step. Maybe it's better in Texas. He's got a really good teammate to work with in Jabbar Barron, who probably should have made the video, but he did not to start out. But he's got a lot of work to do here. I ended up saying about him that he's a gifted prospect, has a lot of experience playing on multiple roles in the defense, and he has seemingly good length for playing inside, and his athletic tools are as good as they come. As a safety, Mukuba has an elite range that could help him thrive, and as a cornerback, he has the movement skills to keep up with anyone. He has elite upside, but he's far away from reaching that. He seemingly struggles to diagnose plays and often finds himself out of them. Despite having elite movement skills, Mukuba struggles to stay in phase with receivers as he doesn't anticipate what's coming next. Mukuba also struggles with adequate strength in run defense, often being washed out of plays or failing to wrap up despite appearing built for it. There's the potential for him to shoot up boards this year because everything is there, but for now, he's a developmental prospect with great upside. I ended up having him as a late third-round pick. I think it's actually a little generous for how I feel about him. I'd probably wait a little bit longer, but my pro comp for him was DJ Turner II. The reason I did that was because both prospects, they were small, uber athletic corners. Turner was ridiculously fast when he came out, but guys who were probably projected to play in the slot at the next level as prospects. They also both struggle with giving up separation due to a lack of anticipation, not their athleticism, and each lacked the build to win in physical situations. I do think that Turner had more of an upside projection. Let me reword that. Turner is more of an upside projection for Mukuba. I would not put Mukuba on the same level right now because Mukuba really needs to refine his game to match him as a prospect. That's the major difference between these two guys. So kind of a light comp there, kind of a ceiling comp, but I think that's what you could see him turn into if he can start to really use those tools and succeed with them. The film I watched for him, I ended up watching Duke, Miami, Florida, and North Carolina, all from 2023. So now getting into another slot corner here and someone with a fun name. We got Sebastian Castro. And this is our second Iowa guy. He's a very interesting one, right? He is 10th on my list, yet has 2 blue chip grades. Because there's some good stuff to this guy, but there's some question marks too, like man coverage. But getting into him, he is a thickly built cornerback. He's under 6 foot, but he's 205 pounds. He has one of the strongest frames in the class. He is a super physical player. He will disrupt routes early and often. He will hit stick people. He has consistently great effort on the field. He's also a smart player. He's someone who has very good processing skills that can create turnovers. He's also sound in zone coverage. I felt like this was where he was his best, and I nearly gave him another blue chip grade there. He also shows intelligence against the run. He has the physicality to consistently get involved in the play. And finally, as far as positives, he's a great run defender, and he's really only limited by missed tackles at this point and lack of great athleticism. Now, if you're a zone coverage team and you're looking for a guy, you're probably taking Castro in the second round. I think that's fair to say, because he is phenomenal in that regard, and I think he makes up for the lack of athleticism. But if you're a man coverage team, you are not touching this guy. He is not what you want, because if he is told you got to stay in phase with this guy, it's probably not going to happen. It's probably not what you want to rely on him for. Getting into my concerns here, he is a very old prospect. Not the oldest. I've looked at the tight end class now, and there are some guys who are like 25 in there, but he is one of the oldest guys. He lacks the experience as well to make up for it. Doesn't have as much playing time as you'd expect for a player who is going to be 24, going on 25, heading into the NFL. He's also generally undersized as far as his frame, and at best, maybe it's average, but not ideal. He lacks good athleticism. It's because of his dense frame, and at most, it's once again average. He has limited time as well in man coverage, not something you saw a ton of from this Iowa scheme, and I don't really trust him once he's not able to press. I think early in routes that he could stick with people because he's able to get physical, but once you get past 5 yards, he's going to lose a lot of guys, and that's what I saw on film when he was in those situations. If he is trying to stay in phase, separation is going to be given up very quick. Just doesn't have the movement skills to stick with guys. He needs to see what's happening, needs to have his head towards the quarterback and be able to process the play. He has to often rely on elite play diagnosis to be in position. As well, I think he's a guy who can clean up his missed tackles. He does also interfere on routes deep into plays, way past the 5-yard line. He kind of has to. He didn't get called for any penalties actually last year. It was 0 penalties, but I could see him at the next level getting a lot of penalties if he's trying to stay in phase with a guy and has to get, physical with him. So I ended up using Chris Smith II as my comp. I'll get into that in a moment, but my summary on him, I ended up saying he's a really physical zone coverage nickelback that brings the boom to those in his way. He's got a strong frame, immense physicality that helps him disrupt routes and press coverage. He's also a vital asset against the run and often finds himself in on tackles. He's a smart football player, usually knowing where to be in coverage and having the processing skills to make big plays despite below average athleticism. What prevents him from being a first-round prospect are some of the obvious concerns. He's one of the oldest prospects in the class. He doesn't have the experience you'd expect for it, and he lacks ideal athleticism by quite a bit. I can't imagine him succeeding in his brand of football against the Tank Dells of the NFL. He's also a major liability in man coverage as he allows immense separation once he's not pressing. Castro will be a scheme-specific prospect, so he'll likely have wildly different projections among NFL teams. I could see him being wiped off boards. I could see him being an early second-round pick. All these things could make him an impact player for his zone coverage defense and well worth the value of a day 2 pick. Now, going back to that Chris Smith II comp, Smith was a player I really liked back in his draft class, and ended up being someone I was probably too high on at the end of the day because there were just too many limitations to his game. But what was so similar about these guys is that they were, smaller, stocky players, but they had exceptional intelligence and physicality. These are very smart guys. They were great run defenders in college because of that size and awareness, But where they struggled was to stay in phase with receivers and man coverage because of that lack of athleticism. Now, kind of a cross position comparison here, right? Because Smith was more of a safety, whereas Castro's more of a nickel corner. They kind of played the same position, though, because I believe Smith moved to nickel quite a bit. But I felt like those players really lined up as far as I saw them. I thought they were smart guys who really just weren't given a great bag to work with as far as their physical tools. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens for Castro in the NFL. He's someone that I don't know how much more I'm going to learn from him watching him in 2024, because you kind of know what he is at this point. Maybe he does something to change that, but I just can't really imagine that. The film I ended up watching for him, and he is a early third round grade, just to say that really quick, I ended up watching Iowa State, Penn State, and Wisconsin, all from the 2023 football season. So now, getting a little bit deeper into the top 10 here, we've got 9 guys left that we're going to discuss. We got Quincy Riley. So Quincy Riley comes out of Louisville. He's an outside corner. He is an older guy as well. I think this is his 6th season of college football. Couldn't get the specific age, but he's going to come in probably around 24. He is 6 foot 195, so pretty good overall size. Not elite, but it's good enough stuff. He's got respectable speed and athleticism. He's a playmaker. He's someone who shows really good smarts in the field when he can watch the play develop. So we're talking about more of a zone guy here. Those instincts show up on film. You're going to see it if you watch him. He is a quick diagnoser. He's going to figure out early in the play what's going on. He's going to be in position to make the play. He has heavy usage in zone coverage. I listed this as a positive because that's where he's best. If you have a zone scheme, he's going to be a really good fit for it. He's also a solid tackler. He can usually be relied upon, especially when downfield. And flashes some physicality as well. One of the last positives I wrote here. He also bulked up this offseason. I think I heard that from an interview when I was watching these guys, because that's something I try to check out with all of them. Because I think for corners, you know, it's important to have the mentality to not give up when you give up a big play, right? To stay in a game and to be able to respond, because you see with some guys, they just aren't really able to recover when they make a mistake. You know, Kalen King is the primary example from last year where his career really just, it tanked because he was not able to overcome a bad game against Marvin Harrison Jr. Those flaws showed up and he was never able to really respond to that and fix it. You know, Keely Ringo being an example of another guy, if you want a second name for that. But that's something we checked out on these guys. He grades out really well for me there. Concerns with Quincy Riley. He's someone that, while he has a lot of experience, he is a very old prospect. He has a hard time sticking with receivers and press coverage. But given that size improving, I'm going to take a look at this again in 2024 because he could be better. Could be able to square up better with receivers. He also lacks explosive movement, which is not going to be helped by adding on size. He isn't more than a good athlete at most. He's also not, he's someone that really, there's not a lot that stands out about him in run defense, and he isn't part of it often since he plays far off the line of scrimmage. In the 3 games I watched, did not see a whole lot of him contributing to run defense, and wasn't necessarily always because he didn't want to, but he's just so far out of the play a lot of the time because he's lined up, 10 yards off the line of scrimmage. But getting into my summary for him, I say he's an older but experienced prospect with a nose for the football. He shows good instincts on the field and does his best when he can watch the play develop. He has respectable physical profile, coming in with just enough size to play outside and add strength entering his final season. Pairing well with his instincts, Riley has been used often in zone coverage and found his best overall play there. While Riley may be better prepared for man coverage now given his added size, he had a hard time sticking with receivers when lined up at the line of scrimmage and press. He doesn't have the explosiveness to stick with everyone, and it can feel like he's just out of his element when he's in those situations. He's also historically struggled as a run defender over a long career, Often not a major asset there, although he improved last year and flashed some good play. I think Riley is a safe projection as a good starting zone cornerback, but he could do more to solidify himself as a complete player. My comparison for him, I ended up going with Garrett Williams, another very good zone cornerback coming out of college. He ended up having a big injury his final year, but still one of the better prospects in that regard. These guys, talking about this comparison, identical frames, both guys with respectable athleticism, but they ultimately lack that ideal top-end speed. They're both guys, when you talk about zone coverage, they showed good instincts. That was where they excelled in their game. That's where their bread and butter was made. Good players in that regard. And I think if you're running a zone scheme, once again, another guy to talk about for this is a guy you're going to want to have high on your list and consider as a draft pick who could probably start for an NFL team. I ended up giving him a middle of the second round grade. Once again, this could change around a little bit, if there's still that major disparity between zone and man coverage. We'll see how that ad size impacts him. As far as the film I watched Notre Dame, Pittsburgh, and Florida State, all from the 2023 college football season. Now, we've got a guy coming up next that is I think still a developmental guy, right? And for some people, he's very high. Some people, he's just not even on the list right now. But that's Azareye'h Thomas out of Florida State. It's a player who kind of started getting his snaps last year. Someone with a phenomenal build overall, but questionable athleticism, which is where I have my concern with him and where we're going to need to see a big step forward this year. And probably someone that when we do summer scouting in 2025 for the 2026 class, maybe he's back here. I'm not sure if he declares this year, but I want to talk about him because he could be someone who could take a big step forward this season. So Azareye'h Thomas, phenomenal build, great length, and a well-filled out frame. He's going to be under 21 entering the draft, 6'2", 194 pounds, really good stuff here. He does a great job of breaking up passes, and he's a lights out guy at the catch point. He is very good in those situations, and that's in large part because of that length. He brings good physicality as well as a tackler. He is a tough guy on the field. He disrupts routes well in press coverage, and he has good experience in a balance of coverages throughout his career. He has not just played one or the other. Now, I will say Florida State in general does play more man, but a lot of teams in general are very zone heavy. So he gets a lot of experience in both of these schemes playing for Florida State because that's what they ask of their guys. They ask a lot, and it's a nice school, especially if you're looking for those man coverage guys because they just get so much more experience than these other schools give guys. Now, concerns for him, right now, I don't think he's an explosive athlete. I didn't really see that on film. I didn't see good change of direction skills. He appears stiff in the hips, and he's someone that I think in addition to the athletic questions where he's not really much above average, he needs to improve his awareness. He needs to react quicker to plays because if he can't do that, that's a bad combination. He also has a few too many missed tackles, not as bad as some other guys, but he's got work to do there. And he's very clearly still a raw prospect at this point. Not a lot of playing time right now. And I want to see him have a better understanding of the game this year. That's somewhere where he really needs to improve. And that physical nature, talking about that physicality, it seems to turn on and off at times. Sometimes he just doesn't get physical. Sometimes he makes a huge play. So you want to see that get more consistent. And I think that will come with experience for him. It's just really a question of, is that athleticism take a step forward? And does he have the big leap this year that allows him to declare as a young draft prospect? A lot of questions there, right? But Thomas, getting into my summary, is a gifted cornerback prospect with phenomenal size. He has a long frame with a huge radius, and he dominates at the catch point when in phase with receivers. He also flashes physicality, blowing up ball carriers and knocking around receivers in press coverage. However, he has some athletic issues that concern me. He's not explosive, he struggles to change direction, and I think that's because of his stiff hips. He also limits himself with late reactions as it's clear he's still learning to process plays in live action. He's still a raw prospect with plenty of room to grow, but the tools are there for him to take a big step forward and be a first-round selection. As of now, I think he's someone you could comfortably take in the middle of the second round. And my pro comp for him is Martin Emerson Jr., someone who's been a very good cornerback for the Cleveland Browns. Both prospects, when comparing them, they were tall, lengthy, and muscular guys with dominant physical games. Both prospects had some concerns with athleticism, staying through transitions with receivers, and they ended up having some questions about their instincts at the end of their college careers. I'd say so far, what I know of Martin Emerson Jr., he's answered those questions pretty well. He's done well for the Cleveland Browns. And so Thomas, we'll see if he can do the same. The film I reviewed for him was LSU, Clemson, and Louisville, all out of the 2023 football season. Now, getting into a fun guy here, and a fun name as well, we've got Cobee Bryant. So, Cobee Bryant doesn't have the most incredible size, right? And I want to make clear what I mean by that. It's not about length. It's about the weight he has on, right? He's 170 pounds right now. We'll see if he bulks up at all for this season, but that's yet to be seen. He is a guy that has good overall length. He is a phenomenal mover, a very good athlete. I gave him an A there. He keeps in stride with receivers very well. He's also a big playability guy. You can find him trying to create turnovers often, jumping plays, being able to guess where the ball is going to go and making the big play. He is also a better tackler than you would expect given his lack of mass. He's instinctual. He gets himself in position and often finishes. And he has that alpha mentality you want in cornerbacks. He might honestly, while I have multiple guys I gave that S tier to because, well, the top of this class has some really incredible prospects, he might be the best in terms of the mentality he brings to the game. This is a guy that when he's on the field, he wants to dominate players. I love to see that. He's physical for his size, way more physical than you'd ever expect. Maybe that raises some injury concerns, but to this point hasn't been a huge problem. And he's great at the catch point. He consistently gets physical, bats passes away, and as a run defender, man, he has the makings of a great player there, but he's got to add that mass to reach his potential. He's going to be someone I'm watching very closely with that weight, because if he can get bigger and he can retain that athleticism, he's going to be a hell of a prospect and could even be someone who goes first round. Now, concerns with him, obviously, it's the size. He comes in significantly undersized. He needs to add mass. He also needs to improve a high percentage of missed tackles. Size is going to help with that. He's also prone to be over-aggressive and miss. It's a part of his game. I think that's something that you can fix. Yeah, I generally like to see guys be more aggressive than not aggressive, but he's got some work to do there. And he's not someone who's got a lot of snaps in man coverage. You can tell he's not super comfortable in those situations. But if he gets some experience, maybe if he sits for a year, he has the tools to be a good man coverage cornerback, given that he can add some size. And then, just talking about that press coverage, perhaps, he does not currently have what he needs as far as size to go up against physical receivers. The perfect example of that is his pro comp here, right? We all know, watching Emmanuel Forbes this last year, where he fell apart was against A.J. Brown, because A.J. Brown is a huge physical receiver, and Emmanuel Forbes is a twig, and apparently he's even more of a twig now if you go look at pictures of him. So it's kind of the same thing here, where the size it's not ideal for Cobee Bryant, and it wasn't for Emmanuel Forbes. Yet Forbes went early. Thanks to Washington, they like to draft some weird players throughout their history. Didn't do that this last year, to be fair. Had some great picks, but, I don't know if Forbes was the first-round pick. I had him as more of a second-round guy, but I could see that with Bryant right now, where he's kind of the same dude, but he has that extra year to hopefully put on some size. But overall, probably a little more excited about what Bryant could be in the NFL than what I was about Forbes coming out. I think Bryant has the potential to be one of those hot risers in this class. Getting into his summary, he's easily someone who could work his way into the first round with another great season. He has great athleticism, good length. He is an incredibly physical player for his size, and he puts himself in good positions on the field, has the instincts to blow up plays and create turnovers. While he's missed some tackles, he often shows good form and delivers the hit, and he has the makings of an alpha cornerback at the next level. With that said, I'd like to see him get more time playing in man coverage to get comfortable there, and he often ended up grabbing receivers and struggling to anticipate each move with his limited time there. He'll also need to add some mass to get up to a respectable playing weight in the NFL. I'd at least like to see him get into the 180s. I think that's a fair expectation, but we'll see what happens, because some of these guys, they come in light, so they can do great at the combine and, run that Nate Wiggins 4.28 and say, hey, I'm a great player because of that. You got to pick me. And then you don't know what to do, right? Because, can he play at that size? But I do think with another year left to grow, Bryant should solidify himself as one of the best cornerbacks in this class, especially right now for zone coverage teams where he has all the tools you're going to ask for. So my pro comp, like I said, Emmanuel Forbes, both players were lean, but lengthy cornerbacks with exceptional athleticism, and they thrived off great instincts. They were constantly blowing up plays, being in good position. The only way they kind of struggled, though, with the athleticism was through phases, which I think was more so, that lack of time and man coverage, especially for Bryant. I do think that Bryant is more physical than what Forbes was. That's a major difference between them, and why I think Bryant is more likely to be successful at the NFL level. I ended up giving him an early second-round grade. I'm very confident in his game, especially if you're a zone coverage team. I don't know if he gets that time in man coverage, but I think he could take a step forward there, and maybe you have to sit him for a little bit his first year if you're one of those teams, but it could be worth it because he's a great player as far as his potential and already what he is now. But film reviewed for him, I watched Illinois, Texas, and Kansas State, all from the 2023 college football season. Now, we're going to get into a slot corner here, and I think he's our last slot corner on this list. We got a guy who's transferred a lot. He likes to transfer in the Pac-12 schools, which aren't Pac-12 anymore, unfortunately, except for one of them I think he went to. But that's Jabbar Muhammad. He's going to Oregon now. Went to the rival team after being on Washington. But he's someone that, not ideal height, right? But he does have a strong, compact build. And I think he's a little bit heavier than what they listed. I think he could be in the 190s, maybe not 183. I also believe Oregon doesn't have updated weights for these guys. I know there was a school up in the Northwest that was having that issue, because I tried to get all these numbers off of school websites from their 2024 rosters, because those were more accurate than what PFF had. And I think Oregon was one of them. I couldn't get that. But getting back to the scouting profile on him, this is an uber confident player. One of the first reasons you get this comp to Jair Alexander. He trusts himself. He carries himself well. And with that confidence, he is a very aggressive player. It can bite, for sure, but he can have some big plays because of it, too. He's an explosive mover. He's someone who's constantly giving high-level effort, and he breaks on routes lightning quick. He gets physical with receivers and ball carriers, and he's got the speed to be an effective blitzer. He's someone with very good processing skills and vision on the field. And I think with his transition to Oregon, something that's very appealing about him is that he's going to get more experience now in a man coverage scheme, more of what Oregon has run. So I'm really excited to watch that for Jabbar. I think that he could become a more well-rounded prospect with that. And you hope, as far as his run defense, just being a better tackler. That's the major concern with him. But getting into the other concerns here, he's someone that, going back to that tackling, it really limits his ability in run defense. I think there's a lot more that he could be that he ultimately just hasn't been because he's not able to wrap up on plays. He also lacks ideal height, although he does appear to have respectable arm length. I could see him surviving outside, but he's probably going to have to move into the nickel. So that's a position change, right? Because he is an outside cornerback right now in college. So that'll be the big question when he comes into the NFL. Another thing with him, he seems quicker than fast. I don't think he has elite speed. I don't think he has the speed to ideally stick with guys down the field, especially those burners. And he's also one of the oldest cornerbacks in the class, although 23 isn't terrible. It's a little bit above average, but that's all right. Now, my summary for Muhammad is that he's an undersized cornerback who's maxed out his frame and made the most of what he has. He's a tough physical presence with great athleticism and anticipation. His film oozes confidence and an aggressive style of play that often pays off. Muhammad is a smart player, processing plays instantly and killing with this downhill speed. Questions will linger about his ability to transition a boundary corner at the next level because of his size, which I think he has a chance at. He also seems to be more quick than fast, lacking some top-end speed that shows up on rare occasions. Perhaps the most prominent issue with Muhammad's game is his tackling, which was often a liability. This is mainly an open space issue as Muhammad comes flying in wanting the big play, which has mixed results. His transition to Oregon will be one to watch as he'll be challenged with more man coverage assignments, so there's still a lot left to learn about this older, experienced prospect. Now, I went with Jair Alexander as my comp, and I felt pretty confident about this one. These are both guys that they were short but maxed out guys in terms of their frames, have a respectable arm length, which I think really helps for both of them as a projection outside. Jair has been able to do that at the NFL level. They're both guys with great instincts. They have a lot of aggression. They have a good combination of athleticism and physicality. However, both players had some tackling issues late in their college careers, but Muhammad's, I would say, are a larger issue, especially since he's declaring 2 years later than Alexander did. That is one big difference between these guys is how long they played in college, because Jair was a much earlier declared. Now, at the end of the day, I've got Muhammad with a good B+ grade, early second round guy, and the film I watched for him was Arizona, Oregon, and Texas, all coming from the 2023 college football season. Now, we're getting into the top 5 here, and we've got a prospect who is almost the exact opposite of Jabbar Muhammad when we're talking about frame. That's Tacario Davis. This guy has length for days. He's the Tetairoa McMillan of cornerbacks for Arizona. I only say that because he's got ridiculous length. But, Tacario Davis, massive frame, all the length you could ever ask for. He's got lots of experience in zone coverage. You'll see I listed his size as A-. You could argue, well, it should be S, right? Because he's got ridiculous size. But I do think that it's a little too much, right? It hurts you as an athlete, and you don't want to be that big, right? I think you want to be more like, at most, maybe 6'3", probably around 6'2", I think is the sweet spot for, where the size really needs to max out. Now, he's a guy who does have pretty good movement skills for his size, and definitely a lot better than expected. He's a good tackler. The size really helps with it. He tries to get involved on run plays, and while he didn't get much time in press coverage, he had some good reps there. He is sound in zone coverage as well, and he's not going to be someone who's a liability to his team there. That's going to be a strength of his, and he shows some good instincts. I don't think they're dominant, but there's definitely something there. Another thing about Tacario Davis is that he's a committed player. He came back to Arizona for another year because he wanted to be with his teammates, so I think this is a guy that, maybe that's an advantage when you're signing that second contract, which should be a prospect who gets the one and is a good starter in the NFL. Now, there are, of course, concerns here, right? And the first thing I'm going to point out when looking at Tacario Davis, as far as concerns, look at the height and weight. You got a guy who's uber long at 6'4", might even be 6'5" for all we know, 185 pounds. So he is not filling out that frame that well. He is very thin for that size, and I want to see him get it up to close to 200. He did say in an interview when I was watching him that he wants to get up to 195. So if he can do that, that's going to help him out a lot. It's going to help him especially in those man coverage situations and not just getting thrown around. He can also get washed out of run plays. That is a big issue. That's the lack of mass showing up. And as a man coverage guy, he's got limited experience, especially in those press man situations. Did not find a ton of that on film. He has essentially no experience playing inside, which you'd expect for a guy who's 6'4". And he doesn't have elite speed. He can allow some separation when getting vertical, and he doesn't have good change of direction skills. Other concerns for him that I have are that he gets a bit too physical on routes, and I think he could be less grabby. And he doesn't have the reactionary athleticism to be an elite zone coverage cornerback. So there's some limitations there from being this big of a player, especially not filling out your frame at this point. My summary for him as a player is that he's a ridiculously long zone coverage cornerback with a sound game heading into his final season. He has good movement skills given his frame, and he's pretty sticky when asked to play man coverage. His frame helps him against the run and as a tackler, and he often lacks the ideal mass to avoid being washed out of plays. While they weren't always prominent, Davis has a good understanding of coverage and plus instincts when assigned to a zone. Unfortunately, he lacks the top-end speed to keep up with the fastest receivers, occasionally grabbing the jersey, which could create penalties at the next level. He's also not the best at change of direction, sometimes losing too much ground on cuts. While I think Davis will be good enough to learn man coverage, I don't see it as his highest ceiling at the next level. Davis should still be considered a top prospect in this class for teams that primarily run zone coverage, and another season of good play could cement that. So my comp for him, I went with Juju Brents. This was a lighter comp, I'd say, but both guys had monster length, guys who were generally lean. I think these are more extreme things for Davis, though. And both players were guys with better than expected athleticism, guys that still, despite that, though, struggled to keep in phase through cuts, especially with deep speed. I was a little disappointed when I watched Brent's it'll be a year ago or two, I believe, at this point, because he's played for a year in the NFL. I do think at this point that Davis is better at breaking up passes and being more disciplined, but Brent did take a step forward late in his college career there. So we'll see how this ends up, but I think that's kind of the closest guy I can find. But at the end of the day, it's going to be a light comp. Tacario Davis is a very much unicorn player in this class. He is my last second-round guy. I have 4 first-round grades. He is the first of those second-round grades. Another B+ in early selection there. Now, the film reviewed for him was Washington, USC, and Washington State, all from the 2023 football season. So now, getting into our first-round guys. We got someone who reminded me quite a bit of a player from this last class, especially when talking about size. And that's Benjamin Morrison, and my pro comp being Nate Wiggins here, which we'll get into that in a moment. But Benjamin Morrison is someone who could end up entering this draft as one of the very best prospects. Right now, he is a middle of the first round guy for me. He's someone who's got a good frame. I think he's got potentially above average arm length, although I have some questions about that. And we've been fooled before, which is where we get the comp with Nate Wiggins. These guys, I feel like if you look up pictures of them, they look like the same guy, especially talking about frame and overall size and how they fill it out. I found with Morrison that he doesn't let size deficiencies from his weight show up often on film. I found he's an elite athlete. It's going to be given how light he is for his frame. He keeps up with receivers easily because he has this ridiculous acceleration, and he does really well flipping his hips. So great through transitions, does well with all those things you're going to ask for. He maintains great leverage through routes, and he allows for minimal separation. He's also someone that, while he's not incredible on run defense and definitely needs work, he will help out when needed. It's not really much of an effort issue. He also mirrors receivers very well vertically and can anticipate better in those situations, though. He has a ridiculous amount of press man coverage experience, and he played over half his snaps there in 2023, so that makes him a really good fit for teams that are looking for someone who can fit that scheme. While he is primarily a press man guy, he has assignment sound in zone coverage, and he flashes some great instincts there. So I think if you're a zone-heavy team, you can still consider Benjamin Morrison. And then the final positive I had for him was that he has the speed to be an effective blitzer. Now, concerns for him, it starts with the very obvious thing here, is that he's noticeably thin. And I'm not sold on him being 186 pounds. I think, in fact, he's probably closer to somewhere in the 170s, maybe 175. He also had some lapses with anticipating routes, allowing separation, although not really too often. And he won't really be a good asset against the run with this size. He needs to desperately add some on. He's someone that doesn't win with the physical game in press coverage, and he's someone who needs to improve his tackling form. Led to some big offensive plays when he was one-on-one with the ball carrier, which is where this run defense really gets slaughtered as far as a grade. He also doesn't lock down crossing routes well, often sitting high and leaving a throwing window open. So he really struggles with leverage on those. And recently as well, a big issue that could really hurt him in the 2024 season is that he's coming off shoulder surgery. There's a chance that he might not start at the beginning of this season, and he could just not be playing that well. I could see him being a prospect that struggles this year and either declares and is lower on the board, maybe a late first, or he ends up having to go back. Final concern with him, not a huge thing here, but he has little to no experience in the slot. Not someone you're going to be moving inside at the next level. So this is an outside cornerback. Now, my summary for him, I said he's an elite athlete with impressive press man coverage skills. He spent roughly half his time in these alignments and dominated these reps despite lacking mass. He has special athletic traits, having crazy acceleration that lets him keep stride for stride with receivers. He plays with good leverage, allowing minimal separation, especially on vertical routes. While he was primarily in man coverage alignments, he was proficient when asked to play zone and flashed instincts on some big plays. While Morrison is a great press man cornerback, he often struggles with crossers by surrendering space and leverage to receivers. He can anticipate cuts better, especially when in off-man coverage. And he actively tries to be involved in run defense, but he's often just another body on a tackle or giving up big plays in those one-on-one situations. I worry that he won't bulk up this season and could enter the draft even lighter than his listed size. If he became a stronger version of himself, Morrison could challenge for the best man coverage cornerback in this class. And that is a big if, because I think he's a little far away as far as size, but we'll see. One thing to note here too, with having a lingering injury that's going to possibly keep him out from the beginning of the season, I think there's some questions about whether Morrison can put on that size or not. I think he could be limited there, and you could see him just kind of be forced to stay where he is and not be able to come in that big into the NFL. So for being a huge question, he is not in a great situation to address it. Now, my pro comp for him, going back to this for a moment, I had Nate Wiggins. And this was a really obvious one for me, one I felt really confident about. Although I do like Benjamin Morrison a little bit more than Nate Wiggins. I said for both these guys, like, identical frames. Both guys with good height, decent arm length, but likely coming in under their listed size at the combine. They're guys who had identical amounts of time in man and zone coverage, both showing dominant traits in man coverage and finding their strength there. But I did say that while he wasn't high on Wiggins last year, Morrison has a year to put on size and won't come in, with the talk of character issues, which Wiggins was reported to have this problem, but I personally think he just interviewed poorly with teams. If you watch his interview from the combine, I don't think he did that great of a job. I don't know if there's anything really wrong with him, but, he just kind of disappointed in that regard when I watched him. But, you're here to play football, so not the biggest deal in the world, but I think Morrison's kind of where Wiggins was last year right now. We're going to have to see if he can put on size. That's going to be the big question with him. But I've got him at this moment as a mid-first. It's possibly drops because of those size concerns and the difficulty to probably address them. My film watch for him was Ohio State, Duke, and USC, all from the 2023 season. Now, we got one more guy before we get into the elite of the elite, because we got two very obvious names at the top. The guy right before that, who I think could be really good at the NFL level and reminds me a lot of a current Carolina cornerback, is Denzel Burke. He's going to come in 22 years old, into the NFL draft, probably turned 23 during that first NFL season. So still generally a young guy, not the most of everyone in the class though. He has a big lengthy frame with good mass. In spite of this good mass, he is a very good mover. He keeps in phase really well with receivers. He's someone who also has a lot of experience in zone coverage, although he's still got room to grow there. You know, with Ohio State, he's a player who's taken on a leadership role. This was something he talked about in interviews, something I found when I was trying to listen to him and get to know him the best I could as a player from YouTube. He's someone who does a great job being physical through routes, someone who does well staying in phase, is a quick downhill trigger, and while he hasn't played lots of man coverage, he clearly shows the skill set to thrive in that role. And so, in spite of him playing a lot more in zone, I actually gave him a higher grade as a man coverage cornerback. Now, there are some concerns here, and what really limits him from being best of the best in this class. He does have a high rate of missed tackles, but he did drastically improve as the season closed. So that is worth noting, but that has to carry over through this season. He's also someone that, while he's a good athlete, he does not have elite athleticism. He lacks that elite closing speed at the catch point. And finally, I felt like his processing skills when watching the play develop were a tad behind, which was really that big limitation in zone coverage. Now, getting into my overall summary on him, you know, Burke is a physically gifted cornerback with a foundation to be a great player at the next level. He has incredible arm length and a strong frame that pairs with exceptional athleticism. Burke has experience in different coverages, although mostly in zone, and does a nice job sticking with receivers when asked to. He's not afraid to get physical, and he always wants to make the big play. Burke doesn't have a major flaw, but he has a lot of skills that he can take to the next level. While he finished the season strong as a tackler, he had some major woes early on that still leave area for concern. And while he's a good athlete, he's not an elite one and can find room to improve his agility. Finally, I'd like to see Burke be a more consistent processor and make the big plays, something he mentioned as an area of focus in his final season. Burke is already a very good prospect and should be an early pick, but there's still room to join the elite club of cornerbacks at the top of this class. My comp for him was J.C. Horn. I ended up getting this because both these prospects were long, stocky cornerbacks with exceptional arm length. They were both players who showed some aggression in their games, and both players had a lot of experience in different coverages. Some differences, though, that I did notice was that Burke isn't really as physical as Horn, which is why I don't know if he'll go as early, but he is a little bit more fluid of an athlete. So maybe a little more gifted in the athleticism department than what J.C. Horn was coming out. So I have Denzel Burke as a middle of the first round guy right now. We'll see if that holds up. I definitely think he's got a little bit to prove this year, especially with some great players at the top of this class. But he's a good prospect. I ended up watching 4 games for him, actually, those being Notre Dame, Maryland, Purdue, and Missouri, all from the 2023 football season. Now, getting into the big guns here. Top 2 guys who should honestly both be probably top 5 picks in this class. And unless you're a bad football team, you're probably not sniffing them. But one can dream, right? I ended up putting Travis Hunter as my second guy, and it is close. It is, I think, a matter of preference. These guys are incredible prospects, and you can see that, you know, based off the fact that you're going to see with both of them, they had blue chip grades in 3 of my 6 categories, and overall, I listed them as blue chip prospects. So talking about Travis Hunter, great length, big frame, and long arms. He has very good speed and great acceleration. As far as character, he's phenomenal in that department. He's shown that they're stepping up for a player who injured him last season. That player, I can't remember if I listed the name here, but yeah, Henry Blackburn. So this was in the Colorado State versus Colorado game. I ended up taking what was seen as a very dirty hit towards the end of the game. I think he had a lacerated liver over it, and there was a lot of death threats being sent to Henry Blackburn. And so Travis Hunter, instead of just simply ignoring it and letting the guy get what maybe he deserved, which no one does, right? I'm not saying he deserved it, but, you know, just leaving the situation that he didn't really have to respond to, he stepped up for the guy, right? He went out and made sure to make it clear that there was no grudges. It's a football game, and I think he showed a lot of tremendous character through doing that. And I think he's doing that as well in an environment with a lot of character concerns. That is a big thing that I worry about with Colorado. Like, I do not like Shedeur Sanders. I'm going to be honest, not talking about him as a prospect, but not seemingly a likable guy. You know, you got your problems with the way Deion Sanders talks. Maybe not everyone agrees with that, right? But you've got the Shiloh Sanders stuff. That whole family has got some issues right now. And you'd think of the whole Colorado program like that, but I want to make it clear that Travis Hunter is not only standing out from that as one of the top character guys from that organization, but he is exceptional in that regard. And so I want to make that very clear. Now, one of the obvious positives with Travis Hunter, the thing that everyone knows, he has cornerback and wide receiver experience. He can play both of these positions at a high level, and that helps him understand the game better. Now, I will say, I have not scouted him yet as a wide receiver. When I go and take a look at that at some point, which it'll be a bit, I'm going to go through all my summer scouting first. Maybe he ends up being a better prospect there. So there is questions about what he's going to do more. It'll be interesting to see if when he comes to the NFL, if he does end up playing both positions a ton. If he does, could see a crazy contract for him on that second contract, but all stuff for way down the road, right? But this is a guy who can do it all. A simple way of putting it. He also seems to have bulked up a bit for his final season, which is a big deal. He's 185 as his listed size right now, and I want to see him take a step forward there. Now, other things I like about him, he always positions himself well in coverage, and he has that elite closing speed to make the play. He'll make a quarterback think the window's open, and he'll slam it shut, and he'll make sure to pick off the pass. He has great instincts in zone coverage. Like I said, he's going to jump routes. He's going to make big plays. He's a good tackler. He did have one bad game in 2023, though, but he didn't really miss the rest of the season. Final thing with him, he's also a guy who has experience playing inside and outside. He was moving all over the formation, so he could be someone that could really just do it all at the next level. Now, there are some concerns with Travis Hunter. One thing is run defense, right? He's 185 pounds. He's not necessarily built for run defense. He isn't able to get off blocks effectively. It feels like his awareness and reaction time could improve in those situations and sometimes in coverage as well. He also needs to continue adding mass, specifically for the NFL, right? And final thing here, it could be argued that the Stanford film should impact his stock. But there could be something there also because he just returned from a major injury. His worst game of the 2023 football season was after his return from that injury we discussed with Henry Blackburn and all that. But it was a bad game, right? And in like one of the worst plays you could possibly be in on a highlight reel, where he basically had the ball caught behind his head and then threw his arms up flailing as he ran to the end zone. It doesn't mean he sucks as a player or anything like that, but it was just very unfortunate to watch as a fan. But that game was bad, right? And maybe that impacts stock a little bit. For me, it does not. I don't think I can fairly say that is what he is, right? It's one bad game in a whole season, and it came off an injury. And you could argue he played pretty well in the first half of that game, too. Now, getting into my summary for him, Hunter is a gifted prospect and a rare two-way player, but his tape at cornerback is special. Hunter still needs to add mass, but he has great length, top-tier athletic traits, and experience in about every type of coverage he could be asked to play. His instincts are out of this world, perhaps a byproduct of his experience playing on both sides of the line of scrimmage. Hunter consistently positions himself for the play, having the elite closing speed to break up the pass or catch it himself. What's perhaps overlooked with Hunter is that while players and coaches in Colorado are looked at poorly because of abrasive comments and character concerns, Hunter has been nothing short of outstanding. He's a man focused on football, and he won't be a guy you'll see in the news for the wrong reasons at the next level. Perhaps the most exceptional thing he's done was standing up for Henry Blackburn, a CSU player who took an unnecessary shot that lacerated his liver, after Blackburn had received death threats over the incident. Simply put, Hunter has all the mental tools you'd ever ask for from a cornerback. I have some minor concerns moving forward, but the biggest would be for Hunter to reach an ideal playing size for the NFL. He's moving in that direction, but it would go a long way toward preventing injuries and helping him make an impact against the run, an area where he struggles. Hunter will be a great player at the next level, and he'll do that in any scheme a team asks of him. My pro comp for him, shout out to Mosier on this one. I ended up going with Champ Bailey. Identical size for these two guys, especially if Hunter adds on a few pounds, he could get there. Both were exceptional athletes. Both guys created a lot of turnovers. They had this incredible play recognition on the field, and they excelled in coverage. I will say one big difference, and this goes back to him needing to add on size, is that Bailey was a better run defender. And so if Hunter can put on those extra pounds, I could really see his career playing out to be comparable to Champ Bailey, at least as a cornerback. And you'll have all those extra snaps at receiver as well, where he'll be making an impact. So really fun stuff to watch. Everyone knows that already. Everyone knows who Travis Hunter is at this point. But he is a blue chip prospect. He should be gone in the top 5 of this class, assuming that there is not 4 other blue chip prospects that I run across in this class. And I don't think there is going to be that. You know, I'm about halfway through. We've got 2 guys so far. But the film watched for him, I watched their first game against TCU, I watched Nebraska, and I watched Stanford. So got a little bit of a mix of good and bad play. I wanted to make sure we at least got one game where maybe there were more questions, and Stanford was the obvious one for that. Now getting to my top guy, and someone that I just, like Travis Hunter, I can't see how he's not going to work out in the NFL. These guys are as safe as it gets. I'll just say it. It's Will Johnson out of Michigan. Absolutely phenomenal player. He has incredible size. He's got the length and mass to outmatch receivers. He's over 200 pounds, playing with this ridiculous athleticism. He is super explosive. He has elite acceleration. He reads receivers quick. He can break on routes instantly and get in position to make the play. He's fluid. He flips his hips quick. He's not afraid to get physical when it's time to get physical. I wouldn't say physicality is a brand to his game, but it's definitely not an issue. He is a very good asset as a blitzer as well. He has lightning quick speed. In low run defense is probably the main issue I have with Will Johnson. He frequently flashes elite potential in that category. Now, I ran through positives very quickly there. But the thing with Will Johnson I want to make clear is that this guy is incredibly close to just being a perfect prospect. As close as you can get, I would say. You know, you're looking at these grades. For me, the only concern that I have is run defense. And I think that he's going to be better there this year. He might be one of the top graded prospects I've ever had at really any position. Now, my concerns for Will Johnson, I did write a few things here, but they're not major. I think he could anticipate speed better early in routes at times. He does have the tools to make up for it, though. He also has little to no experience against the run. He's often serving as the last line of defense, similar to what we talked about with Quincy Riley. He's usually far away from those plays. He's lining up far away at times. It's also an average tackler. Not bad, but mostly average at this point. I think he'll continue to grow there. He needs to improve his angles, especially when tackling. He could gain more leverage on routes. I think that's an area where he could improve a little bit. And occasionally you'll see him panic when the receiver gets separation. Not common, but that'll happen. And when he panics, he gets penalized because he's grabbing at the receiver. Final concern here, little to no experience playing in the slot. He is going to be an outside guy. Boo-hoo, right? Get yourself a slot corner. It's going to be fine having Will Johnson on your team if you pick him. I wrote for my summary, he's a damn near perfect prospect heading into his final season. He is the rare player that you can truly say has the perfect build with ridiculous length, ideal mass, and explosive athleticism. Johnson has been Michigan's top dog in the secondary, they've assigned him to elite players like Marvin Harrison Jr. and Rome Odunze, all of whom he more than held his own. The lights weren't too bright, as Johnson made some of the biggest plays in the biggest moments. The sole concern that I have with Johnson is one of the minor aspects of playing outside, run defense. Johnson has inconsistent angles and found himself out of position too often. That said, he still flashes those moments with elite play in that department. Other than the occasional bad rep, Johnson gets near perfect grades across the board and could be the best prospect in this class. I'm very confident that he ends up being the best prospect in this class because it's going to be hard to overcome those grades on the right of the screen. But my pro comp, this was an easy one for me. Patrick Surtain II. Guys that are incredible lockdown corners, maybe not the biggest assets to the run game, but just incredible at what they do. They had identical physical profiles, both with exceptional length, both playing above 200 pounds. Both prospects were lockdown guys coming out of the college level, and the issues were similar, right? It came down to minor things like lapses in run defense or occasionally getting too physical and creating a penalty. These guys are really close in comparison. Patrick Surtain II ended up going somewhere, I believe, around like 9th or 10th overall in the draft. So I cross my fingers Will Johnson does that too, and the Jaguars trade up for him, but pretty unlikely, right? I would not blame a team for taking Will Johnson first overall in the draft. We'll see, of course. There's still players to scout, right? I've got linebackers, I got defensive tackles, tight ends, running backs, and quarterbacks. So there's other positions too. But he is clearly, for me, the top guy. Travis Hunter could overtake him, but I just think that Will Johnson's play is incredible. And so, if you're going to put Hunter over him, I think it comes down to maybe that two-way playability and the upside that he has in his final season. So he gets a blue chip grade from me. If I had a generational grade, he might be close to that because he's just a phenomenal player. And I watched some hard opponents for him. I watched Ohio State against Marvin Harrison Jr. I watched Alabama, which, given that's Jermaine Burden more so, and Isaiah Bond. And I watched Washington, where he went up against one of the best receiving trios in college football. So he showed up to those games, and that's why he gets that S tier in his mentality, because this guy came up to the biggest moments, and he showed out in the biggest moments. So I'm really impressed by what Will Johnson's got to his game. I think he is a slam dunk prospect, and it's going to be one of the best picks from the 2025 NFL draft class 10 months from now. But I think it's safe to say that. So that's what we got here. We had 16 prospects we went through. A lot to talk about, right? I mean, these are long videos. They should shorten up here, though. Next video should be tight ends. I'm going to try to have that out a week from now. Maybe that won't happen, but I think it will. I've got 8 prospects we're looking at to start. And then hopefully once we wrap this all up, maybe I can give you a preview of my big board to start things out. And, over the course of the season, we'll see what happens. A lot's going to change. It's always the way it is, but this gives you a nice introduction to some very strong classes in this upcoming draft. So, hey, I appreciate you guys watching, especially if you watch this whole video. Thank you if you did that. I'm very impressed by that. But it was fun. We'll get to tight ends next, and we'll have our normal Jaguars content throughout the week too. But thanks for joining. Hope you all have a great rest of your day. And finally, go Jags.